There's most definitely a lot of electric vehicle misinformation out there. There are some YouTube channels that are just purely dedicated to basically just complaining to the media and legacy journalism sites, new journalism sites that love to smear EVs, and I even interact with it a lot in my personal life with friends and even family members that are just not necessarily ill-intended, but they just were told or read things about EVs that were not true. And for a long time, I used to fight it as much as possible. I used to speak up and say, hey, that's not true, or you're not right, and I heard differently elsewhere, and I know for a fact you were fed incorrect information. But in today's video, I just wanted to explain as to why more recently I don't even really try anymore. Because for one, I've discovered that a lot of the time in personal life, if you're talking with someone that might have the opinion towards EVs that they're entirely a waste of time and they're far too expensive, but if it's the kind of person that was never really open to the idea of EVs anyway, you'll notice that it doesn't really matter what you say. And this is what I started experiencing over and over again, is like, no matter what I said, they were just against the concept as a whole because they don't want someone telling them what they gotta buy, or they're very passionate or very comfortable with their gas vehicles and they're just gonna keep buying their gas vehicles. No matter really what you try to say, like the most common criticisms I get is that batteries for EVs need to be replaced after like 10 years, or that they only last like 100,000 miles before they need to be replaced, or another common one is that batteries spontaneously catch on fire in electric vehicles and all of them keep blowing up, despite the fact that gas cars blow up way more often than EVs do. But there's only so much arguing, especially in person, that you can really do. After a certain point, you'll start to realize that even if you defend EVs, even if you have the facts to back up your claims, they just don't want to buy an EV. And a lot of the time they're in a position where even if they wanted to buy an EV, they can't necessarily afford it or justify it, and they were basically just going online with confirmation bias, only interpreting the data that supported their opinion so that they could justify, well, anybody who says EVs are good doesn't actually know anything, and they're not actually very good. I will be perfectly fine not buying an EV because EVs just aren't that great anyway. It's how they justify it in their heads as to, well, saving up for an EV or changing the way I charge my car from home or anything, that's just so much work, that's gonna take so much time. I might as well just write off the entire idea and really dwell onto any negative news stories that I see on EVs. And unfortunately, what that's turned into for me a lot of the time is people seeing that I own a Tesla and then telling me exactly why that would be a terrible decision for them. And I don't really like fighting people on that. It's like, you know what? If you don't want to buy an EV, that's fine. Just don't buy one. And there's people that I've run into in my personal life that think that the range is like 100 miles and the charging speed is really long. And you know, a few years ago, I would have been quick to correct them, but what I started realizing was fighting the EV misinformation wasn't really helping the EV transition all that much, because ultimately, unless you're Lucid Motors, basically everyone has the same problem with EV adoption. They can't build enough of them, or they can't build them fast enough. There are so many great electric vehicles to choose from that I dive into on this channel all the time, that Tesla's offering, Rivian's offering great ones, Aptera's got a great concept, and for the most part, all of these brands have plenty of demand. So many people that are willing to buy their vehicles, they just can't build enough of them. And like I've been saying on this channel for years, demand is not the limiting factor. It is production capacity, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, especially if you consider how many people want to go electric but simply can't right now because they're not in a good financial position, and EVs are kind of expensive, and all of this pent-up demand for EVs has definitely driven the price up. So when you run around online or run around in the real world trying to tell people that EVs are great, EVs are the future, EVs are much better than gas cars, all you ultimately do is increase the demand further, and that in return results in EV companies feeling comfortable raising prices because they know they've got a demand backlog. So this is going to sound kind of selfish, what I'm about to say, but ultimately I do think it will be better and more rewarding for the EV enthusiasts and the EV fans out there. But if we just let all of the misinformed people continue to be misinformed about EVs, then we might actually keep prices reasonable. You know, I think it might be a better place for the EV community as a whole if all these companies had to try harder to convince people to go electric, right? Like, if you didn't have a giant demand backlog and you didn't have a very long line of people willing to buy your EV, you might try a bit harder to make it a more compelling offer. You may lower prices, you may offer more trims, more tiers, and start gauging your audience and figuring out, okay, why aren't more of you buying buying this car? What do we need to do to make our electric vehicle more appealing? And especially in the case of Tesla, the world's largest EV maker, the reason they have such an insane demand backlog and the reason they have the thickest profit margins in the industry is because there's so many people that have already been convinced, I do want an electric vehicle. I don't want to pay for gas anymore. I want that supercharging network. I want that autopilot software. And it's all of that hype that has made Tesla so comfortable with, yeah, we're going to remove the radar. Yeah, we're going to remove the ultrasonic sensors. Yeah, we're going to raise prices, and there's really nothing you can do about it because if you don't buy our vehicle, someone else in line will. And that's really frustrating because I know, I've seen the comments out there. There are lots of you that want to buy EVs, but they're just too dang expensive. So if we kind of just let the people that are against EVs continue being against EVs, then the EV manufacturers can catch up on the actual demographic that is willing to go electric, and once they do that, they can try harder to win us over, and that can result in more price drops or more compelling EV options to choose from with more range or better traction control or better luxury features that can justify more people going EV. Now, I know it's frustrating to so many out there. It's like, yeah, but they're just wrong, and they don't realize they're wrong. They think they're right. And a lot of the time, it's not even their fault, but for others, they're definitely kind of leaning into it, looking for EV misinformation so they can justify not buying one in their heads. But especially with that former demographic, I would just argue that they're hurting themselves. If there are people out there that don't want to go electric and want to continue paying for gas, continue paying for brake pad replacements, and they want to continue paying for oil changes, then let them. You know, if that's what they want, I'm not going to fight them on it. I personally think that's objectively worse. I think that's a waste of time and money, but if that's what they want, okay, keep buying them. More EVs for the rest of us that are actually aware of how much better these products really are. And ultimately, I don't think we need to win the EV argument with every person we meet. We can't really control what other people do with their money or with their choices. We can only control what we do. And to be truthful here, if everybody was on the same page, like all human beings on Earth realized that gas was a waste of money and EVs were the future and everybody wanted to buy an EV at the same time, we don't have enough batteries. We don't have enough EVs being manufactured to switch all new vehicles over. So the only people that could actually afford the EVs would be a very small percentage of the wealthy class, and all EV manufacturers would be charging way more than what they're charging today if literally everybody in the car market put their foot down and said, I'm not buying a gas car anymore. It would be a much worse situation than we're in right now. So in an ironic way, we're kind of depending on the misinformed and the gas car buyers to keep EV prices reasonable. And while yes, they are pretty bad right now because of the high backlog, it's important to acknowledge it could be a lot worse if everybody started to buy EVs and stop buying gas cars. Sure, you might be able to argue there's some indirect advantages, like if everybody was on board EVs at the same time, then EV startups maybe would have thicker profit margins and more funding to expand the production of EVs, but ultimately, I think this discussion comes down to, do you want the adoption of electric vehicles to be easier for the companies making the electric vehicles, or would you like it to be easier and more digestible for the consumers buying the electric vehicles? And I don't necessarily think one is better than the other, but for my own biased and opinionated logic, I prefer it being easier on the consumer. For you guys, not the EV manufacturer. Let them work harder and try to win you over with lower prices or better features, rather than let the companies do whatever they want because they know they have infinite demand. So it feels weird, it feels a bit bizarre, but that's honestly why when I encounter EV misinformation in the real world or even online, I don't fight it anymore. I'm like, if you think EVs are stupid, then don't buy EVs because we can't make enough of them for the people who actually want them. You just keep blowing your money out your tailpipe. That's fine. That's your stupid choice and you're entitled to your stupid idea. But I'm very happy with my Model 3. I love not paying for gas. I love charging from home, and I love how quiet it is, and I love how easy it is to control from my phone app. I'm just gonna keep on enjoying it and hope that prices come down so that more people out there can enjoy the electric future. But really, it's fine if only people that are interested in EVs are the early adopters. We don't need to convince everybody that doesn't want an EV that they need to buy one when we can't build enough of them anyway, right? So, am I crazy? Is this a bizarre viewpoint that you don't hear all that often? Feel free to let me know down below, and thank you to everyone on Patreon supporting this channel directly. Seriously, helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos. So thanks again. Have an excellent rest of your day.